Time being, it is strictly an air attack. No ground forces are involved yet. As for casualties, the U.S. Pentagon says it's too early to talk about that. Beyond that, they're not giving out much hard information at this point. But we know from reports from Baghdad that the city has been hit by at least 4 waves of bombers. The strikes seem mostly to be aimed at targets on the outskirts of the city. We assume that Iraqi positions in Kuwait are being hit heavily as well. As for the countries directly involved in this operation, we know only that the Americans, the Saudis, and the British are taking part, Kuwaiti aircraft as well. Canadians are not involved directly. The CF-18s based in Qatar, for example, are flying their usual patrols over the Persian Gulf. All of this information took some time to confirm. In fact, the first inkling that this was not going to be an ordinary night came from U.S. television newscasts. Indeed, this may be the first war that started live on television. At 6:36 Eastern Time this evening, the cable news network interrupted an interview to take a phone call from Baghdad, where its correspondents reported that the skies were lighting up over Iraq's capital.
This is, something is happening outside. Peter Arnett joined me here. Let's describe to our viewers what we're seeing. The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky. Peter?
Well, there's anti-aircraft gunfire going into the sky. We hear the sound of planes. They're coming over our hotel. However, we have not yet heard the sound of bombs.
So far, there's been no official reaction to all this from Iraq. Reports from Turkey say Baghdad radio has been broadcasting readings from the Muslim Quran since the attack began. There's been no mention of the air raids. At this point, there is no confirmed Iraqi retaliation beyond anti-aircraft fire within Iraq's boundaries. There are a number of reports, though, that Iraq got off some missiles. According to the BBC, 5 Scud missiles. U.S. officials, though, say that as far as they know, the report is false. There is another report, however, this one from the Bahrain Civil Defense Directorate, that missiles were detected heading for an area around Bahrain and eastern Saudi Arabia. The directorate says the missiles fell short of their targets. About 40 minutes after the first hits were reported on Baghdad, air raid sirens started going off at the huge coalition air base in eastern Saudi Arabia. Reporters there were told to go to air raid shelters. They were warned to put on their chemical weapons gear. CNN reporter Charles Jaco was on the air at the time.
Yes, the air raid sirens are just now going off here near these U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia. We've sent the entire camera crews inside right now. We're all preparing to put on our gas masks, as we've been told. There are sounds of planes overhead. We don't know whose planes there are, but air raid sirens are going off insistently. There are military convoys on both sides of me. We're being told to get off this platform and get inside into the air raid shelter immediately. But right now, everyone's been training for this, and it looks like we may have to.
Sometime after that, the sirens stopped. There was no attack. It was a false alarm, and reporters started returning to their positions. As we have said, there are no reports of any attacks on Saudi Arabia, no Iraqi retaliation. In the end, the decision to use force was up to Washington, and White House officials went on U.S. national television tonight to explain it. Our Washington correspondent, Terry Malefsky, has more on how the military action began and what the Bush administration is saying about it.
The first unmistakable sign came when squadrons of F-15E fighter bombers began taking off from bases in Saudi Arabia. That was shortly before 1 a.m. local time, 5 p.m. Eastern time. But it was not until 2 hours later, when they had reached Baghdad and the bombs began to fall, that the White House made it official.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation Desert Storm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council. As of 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq.
2 hours later, a grim President Bush prepared to announce that he intended nothing less than to wipe out Iraq's military potential.
We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal. Initial reports from General Schwarzkopf are that our operations are proceeding according to plan. Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free.
The president also addressed American fears, saying he did not aim to conquer Iraq, that no ground forces were yet engaged, and that he hoped it would all be over quickly.
I've told the American people before that this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back. I'm hopeful that this fighting will not go on for long.
Minutes later, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney said the operation had not encountered significant resistance and that no Scud missiles had been launched by Iraq. Desert Storm, he said, involved 4 nations and hundreds of aircraft.
The operation underway tonight, taking place in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, involves allied air forces of 4 nations: the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. As they undertake their missions, they do so after months of careful planning. At the direction of the President, great care has been taken to focus on military targets, to minimize U.S. casualties, and to do everything possible to avoid injury to civilians in Iraq and Kuwait.
Operation Desert Storm is not over yet by any means, so the Pentagon is not releasing any detailed reports on what it has accomplished. We do know that President Bush made his final decision to launch this assault yesterday afternoon, but the months of planning which preceded that appear to have paid off. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney said tonight that the Iraqi response was so limited that he described the casualty reports as encouraging. Peter?
All right, Terry, thanks very much. The Israeli army says that U.S.-led forces have bombed missiles in Iraq that it said were aimed at Israel. A brigadier general in Israel's army says the Iraq missile system has been hit several times. Iraq had threatened to attack Israel if the multinational forces attacked it. Authorities there are warning people to stay in their homes and prepare for a possible chemical weapons attack. The warning came from the Israeli army. It was described as a precautionary measure. Israel has issued gas masks to nearly all of its 4.7 million citizens. Saddam Hussein has threatened to use chemical weapons against Israel if attacked. Now, as soon as news of the fighting reached Ottawa tonight, the Prime Minister called an emergency meeting of top cabinet ministers and later spoke to the House of Commons about Canada's part in the conflict. More on tonight's developments as they unfolded from Karen Webb.
On a night when the Peace Tower was shrouded in fog, Canada and the United Nations went to war. The government's first response to war in the Gulf was a meeting of the Cabinet Committee dealing with the war. On his way in, the Prime Minister was asked if he'd been told in advance about the bombings of Baghdad. He gave a terse, one-word answer.
Yes.
The head of Canada's armed forces, General John de Chastelain, said he didn't know whether Canada's forces in the Gulf were involved.
I have no word on that yet.
As war broke out, the House of Commons was still debating the government's resolution backing the United Nations.
I've just been handed a note, Mr. Speaker, and the White House has now confirmed the war has started. Shame. Shame.
The House adjourned for the parties to meet. Reaction to the war was mixed, even within the same party. New Democrat leader Audrey McLaughlin, for instance, said she didn't think Canadian forces should be involved in Operation Desert Storm.
The position of the New Democratic Party is the position that we took this afternoon when we voted unanimously on our amendment, which was that Canada should not take place in any offensive act.
Dave Barrett, however, said the time for debate was over.
It's done. It's done. You know, we could spend hours talking about could-haves, would-haves, and should-haves. It's done. I regret that sanctions weren't given a greater chance, particularly with the information of all places from the CIA to the American House of Representatives saying that sanctions were beginning to work. But it's done. We're here. And It's just regrettable, and we hope that the losses are minimal for everybody.
Liberal Paul Martin said it was time to back up Canada's forces in the Gulf.
Now that it would appear that hostilities had begun, I think that everybody's first call is to give support to our troops, and the Canadians are over there.
A meeting of the full cabinet ended shortly before 10 this evening. Defence Minister Bill McKnight gave General de Chastelain a thumbs up. Shortly afterwards, Prime Minister Mulroney spoke to the House of Commons.
If Canada had stood aside, we would have betrayed our own national interests, repudiated our own responsibilities, and dishonored our own traditions. Canada did not stand aside in 2 world wars in Korea. Canada did not stand aside from the hard work of seeking a peaceful end to the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. And, Mr. Speaker, Canada is not standing aside tonight from giving effect to the United Nations resolutions in the Persian Gulf.
The Prime Minister said that Canadian CF-18s would be flying combat air patrol over the Gulf, protecting Canadian and Allied ships. In addition, he said the CF-18s would be allowed to fly escort for bombers and fighters on their missions over Iraq and Kuwait.
Now is the time for all Canadians to put aside their differences and rally to their support. I am sure that all honourable members join me and all Canadians in praying that this war end quickly and that all Canadians welcome home our brave fellow citizens who defend freedom and the cause of peace.
Opposition leader Jean Chrétien said that, like the Prime Minister, he regretted deeply the failure of diplomacy in the Gulf.
We regret that our request that search be made for a peaceful solution have fallen on deaf ears. But at the same time, we will support the efforts of our men and women in the Persian Gulf.
New Democrat leader Audrey McLaughlin said she regretted that war had become reality.
Our first thought tonight, like all Canadians, I'm sure, is for the men and women who are in the Middle East and those families of those men and women. It is surely, whatever one's opinion is, a great tragedy for Canada, a great tragedy for those people. But it does not in any way undermine the fact that they are there, that war has become a reality, that our thoughts are with them and our prayers are with them.
After his speech, the Prime Minister said he was going back to 24 Sussex Drive to confer with other Allied leaders. The government says there will be no more statements until tomorrow. Karen Webb, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, before the fighting started tonight, Ottawa announced that it's sending more Canadians to the Persian Gulf. In about 2 weeks, 550 people will be going to Saudi Arabia. They'll be setting up a field hospital there close to the Gulf Coast. And as Keith Bogue reports now, the request for the medical center came from Britain.
Field hospital staff immediately began preparing for the trip. They'd been expecting the announcement.
This is something that we have preparing ourselves by watching and witnessing things on television. We've known that something, ourselves individually, that this could happen. So you prepare yourselves.
Really, it's hard to say right now. I won't really know how I feel until I actually get over there.
In all, more than 500 Canadians, doctors, nurses, support staff will be heading to the Gulf over the next few weeks. They know roughly where in Saudi Arabia they'll be stationed, but their exact destination has not yet been decided. National Defense says it will be relatively close to the front lines.
Well, they are a third-level facility, and they would be employed no further forward than the third echelon, if you wish. And we are talking about possibly 50 kilometers, 50 miles. It's that range.
The request for a hospital came from the British more than a week ago. It's taken time to make sure the hospital could meet requirements. It will take more time before it's actually in position. Initially, a surgical center will be sent. It arrives in Saudi Arabia at the end of the month. The rest of the hospital will not arrive before the end of February. When it arrives, the hospital will be under British tactical control, but it will handle casualties of all nationalities, including prisoners of war. Most of the personnel will come from Canadian Forces hospitals and bases across the country. Tonight, some of those people and their families began trying to adjust to the new task.
I'm scared of casualties. Like anybody, I'm scared of actually seeing somebody on the table that I know very, very well.
My own safety might be compromised, but that's the risk for anybody. That's not just me, that's everybody. And we all have that fear that maybe I won't be coming back.
Keith Bogue, CBC News, Ottawa.
To London now, where our senior European correspondent, Joe Schlesinger, is standing by with the latest on reaction in that part of the world. Joe.
Most of Europe was already asleep when the news broke. In London, the government announced that its Tornado planes based in Bahrain had taken part in the action and that the Prime Minister, John Major, would address the nation at breakfast time. In Brussels, NATO ambassadors were called into an extraordinary 3 a.m. session to consider the new situation. In Paris, the government said it would say nothing before daylight. A few hours earlier, President François Mitterrand had gone on TV to announce that he was committing French forces in the Gulf to fight. The French, who normally like to operate independently, took the unusual step of putting their forces under U.S. operational control. In Paris, as elsewhere, there were demonstrations before the fighting broke out. More such demonstrations are expected in the morning as the news of the war spreads. Security precautions are being strengthened at airports and government buildings to try to avoid terrorist attacks. At London's Heathrow Airport, the army brought in armored vehicles. Here are the first editions of the London newspapers. The news came too late for most of them. Gulf War imminent, says the Times. But some of the tabloids got it right. And the Daily Star has a headline, Attack. The Daily Mail got it too. U.S. bombers hit Baghdad. And the Daily Express, war erupts. Peter?
All right, Joe, thank you. United Nations Secretary General Javier